The storm that rolled in over Marlow City was more of a whisper than a roar, drizzling rain, a muted sky, and the kind of wind that carried secrets. In a cramped apartment above a forgotten bookstore in the old quarters, Claire Mori adjusted the sleeves of her faded navy sweater. Everything she wore had been chosen with precision, plain, frayed, unassuming. The kind of outfit that wouldn't raise questions, not from her family, not from the photographers that might catch her walking into the Rothschild Tower tomorrow. Not yet. On the chipped desk near her window sat an old tablet, screen cracked but still functional. A few amateur sketches flickered on it, cartoonish, innocent, intentionally unimpressive. Just enough to keep up appearances. Beside the tablet lay a heavy envelope with the gilded seal of her family's empire, Rothschild Financial Group. You are cordially invited to celebrate 75 years of Rothschild excellence, the invitation read. Beneath the embossed lettering, Claire's name appeared almost like an afterthought, squeezed in below the bold font that listed her cousins and siblings, all touted as the future of finance and law. She let her fingers trace the name as if trying to etch her presence deeper into the page. She hadn't set foot in Rothschild Hall in years. They still called her the dropout, the rebel, the disappointment. The youngest daughter of a financial dynasty who, instead of pursuing hedge funds or Harvard, had vanished into the world of animation and storytelling. What her father once scoffed at as doodling for fun. She remembered the conversation that changed it all. She'd been 18, accepted into the business analytics program at Halverton University, a legacy spot, practically handed to her. But instead of taking it, she'd walked into her family's winter gala and announced she was attending a small creative arts institute in the Southern District. The silence had been deafening. Her mother had cried in the bathroom. Her father didn't speak to her for 6 months. Her oldest brother, Henry, declared it a phase. That was 13 years ago. What no one knew was that while she honed her craft, learning storyboarding, character arcs, and motion design, Claire also spent nights in the back of lecture halls sneaking into business courses, studying financial modeling on borrowed textbooks. She freelanced obsessively, eating canned soup for weeks just to afford better editing software. She learned to write pitch decks, to negotiate, to fail. Then, 6 years ago, a web mini-series she animated for a friend's wellness startup went viral. 2 million views in a week. That attention landed her a micro-contract with a tech firm, $8,000 and a shot at something bigger. That was the seed. Now, Claire Mori was the founder and CEO of NovaPath Media, a storytelling and brand development firm so discreet, even her own family didn't know it existed. They thought she was still selling quirky illustrations on Etsy. What they didn't know was that NovaPath powered internal training and campaign materials for half the city's biggest corporations, and had just finalized a full acquisition of Velar Group Media, one of Rothschild's struggling subsidiaries. By this time tomorrow, she wouldn't just be the dropout. She'd be the silent force that now held a critical piece of the Rothschild portfolio. Her phone buzzed on the sill beside her. A message from Juno, her COO and closest friend. Final signature confirmed. Velar is ours. You're officially their boss now. Congrats, boss queen. Claire smiled softly, her eyes watering just slightly. It wasn't the power that moved her. It was the quiet satisfaction. The irony. All these years they had written her off. Had treated her as a cautionary tale. Had offered internships out of pity. Her mother once sent her a care package filled with job listings and a self-help book titled Failure to Fortune, Finding Stability After Dreams Don't Work Out. She'd kept the book. Not as inspiration, but as fuel. Looking around her modest apartment, faux wood floors, mismatched furniture, walls lined with pinned-up drafts and sketches, Claire felt both grateful and ready. The space didn't reflect the empire she'd built, but it served its purpose. It allowed her to remain invisible. Tomorrow would change that. She walked over to her wardrobe and pulled out the coat she'd wear to the Rothschild anniversary event. It was old, a little tight at the sleeves, with a missing button near the collar. Her hair would be tied back plainly, her makeup minimal. Every detail meant to whisper failure. Because failure was disarming. It lowered defenses. It invited arrogance. And her family had arrogance in spades. She wasn't attending the event to boast or flaunt. No. She was going to watch. To observe the faces of those who had built walls with their assumptions. She would let them talk about expansion and innovation, unaware that the keys to that future now sat in her hands. Claire's gaze drifted to the window, where the city blinked in golden fog. Somewhere out there, her father was probably rehearsing his speech about family legacy. Henry would be polishing his cufflinks, preparing to unveil a new investment strategy he'd likely stolen from one of his analysts. Her sister, Ava, would be silently judging everyone, all while drafting press notes on her phone. They would look at her like a broken branch on the family tree. She would let them. Just for one more night. Then, when the time came, Claire Mori would pull back the curtain. And behind it, they'd see the empire she had built from pencil strokes and pixel dust. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove herself right. The rain hit the glass with a steady rhythm. She closed her tablet, tucked it into her bag, and stared into her own reflection, soft-eyed, quiet, underestimated. Then she whispered to herself, almost like a promise. Let them sleep on me. I'll wake them with thunder. It all began with pixels, tiny shapes and shadows Claire Mori breathed life into during long, sleepless nights in a cramped dorm room at the Marlowe Institute of Arts. The building was ancient, the heat barely worked, and the cafeteria food tasted like cardboard. But for Claire, it was sacred ground. While her classmates immersed themselves in color theory and movement studies, Claire had a second life. After classes ended, she headed to the 24-hour tech commons at a nearby university, crashing seminars she wasn't enrolled in. She sat in the back, unnoticed, quietly absorbing everything from startup strategy to capital structuring. She wasn't just dreaming about being an artist, she was reverse engineering how to become a business. In her final year, Claire entered an obscure contest hosted on a niche startup forum. The challenge? Design a 3-part animated explainer for a new wellness product. The reward? $10,000 and a contract to produce a full series. She almost didn't enter. But one night, after seeing yet another email from her father about reconsidering Halverton and making something of herself, she stayed up until sunrise, storyboarding her pitch frame by frame. She won. The series launched, gained traction on indie blogs, and unexpectedly caught the attention of a mid-sized tech firm specializing in AI-integrated health tracking. They reached out with a proposal: produce a content campaign for their user onboarding. Claire said yes. With that initial money, she didn't upgrade her laptop or buy new clothes. Instead, she hired 3 freelancers, one animator in Poland, a voiceover artist from Brazil, and a motion designer based in Manila. She paid them well, delivered ahead of schedule, and the client was floored. Referrals followed. By the time she was 25, Claire had formed the foundation of what would become NovaPath Media, a remote-first creative agency specializing in immersive, emotionally driven brand storytelling. No office, no traditional hierarchy, and no traceable ties to her family name. Everything was registered under her middle name, Claire Elise Mori, and she operated quietly but with precision. Each year, the business grew. Quietly. At 27, she had a team of 40 contractors, 5 dedicated project leads, and a private Slack channel that hummed across time zones. The firm's portfolio included internal content for an aerospace manufacturer, a rebrand for a fintech app, and even an animated series used by the Ministry of Education in another country. Still, no one knew who she was. When her parents asked about her job, she simply replied, "I work on some freelance campaigns, mostly graphics." It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the full story. They assumed she was struggling. Occasionally, her mother would deposit money into her account with little heart emojis in the message, for groceries or something warm. She left it untouched every time. Claire rented a modest flat above a bookstore not because she needed to, but because it kept her anchored. In truth, she owned 3 properties around the city under shell companies. One was a modern loft in the tech district, fully furnished and used for investor meetings. Another was a countryside retreat where she wrote scripts and reset her mind. The third was a penthouse in the harbor quarter with a sweeping view of the sea, which she kept mostly for moments of quiet victory. Her empire wasn't built on luck, it was built on pattern recognition. She had studied how corporations failed to connect emotionally. Their videos were cold, mechanical. Their language robotic. Claire infused every NovaPath project with feeling, with storytelling that resonated. Characters who mattered. Journeys that meant something. And it worked. By 30, NovaPath had broken 8 figures in revenue. Quietly, privately, powerfully. But she wasn't done. She noticed something during a quarterly industry audit. A media subsidiary of Rothschild Financial was hemorrhaging capital. Poor leadership, outdated strategy, and a failed acquisition spree had weakened their foothold in digital content. The division, known as NovaPath Media, had once been a rising star, but now sat dormant, ripe for revival or replacement. Claire didn't hesitate. She had her legal team create a new entity, Solara Holdings, with no public ties to NovaPath. Solara made an offer to acquire VR, presenting itself as a turnaround firm with a vision. Rothschild, desperate to offload the struggling asset, agreed. The board signed. No one asked who the majority stakeholder behind Solara was. And just like that, a piece of the Rothschild empire now belonged to Claire Mori. The poetic symmetry didn't escape her. She remembered how her brother once laughed at her during a family dinner when she mentioned using animation to tell business stories. The only people who need cartoons in business, he'd smirked, are the ones too dumb to read charts. Now, she was about to step into a boardroom and lead an internal overhaul of that same brother's prized digital division. They wouldn't know it yet, but she would soon be writing the strategy, assigning the roles, and determining the future. One acquisition. One chess move. One revelation away from complete control. But Claire wasn't interested in domination. She wasn't trying to destroy Rothschild Financial. She wanted to evolve it. To show them that the very thing they ridiculed, her imagination, was the only thing that could carry their legacy forward. The night before the anniversary gala, she sat in her penthouse studio with floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the glowing skyline. She reviewed the final documents from her general counsel, marked with signatures, and sealed in embossed folders ready for distribution. Her assistant, Rena, messaged with a checklist. Claire responded with a single thumbs up. Tomorrow, she would walk into that polished boardroom dressed not in apology, but in authority. Tomorrow, they would learn who Claire Elise Mori had become. But for tonight, she allowed herself one final moment of quiet victory. She poured herself a glass of wine, walked out to the balcony, and looked down at the city below. "I built this," she whispered, "with pencils, pixels, and patience." The rain had stopped. The sky was clear. And the next chapter was about to begin. The Rothschild estate was more fortress than home, a grand limestone structure tucked behind wrought iron gates, surrounded by manicured gardens that looked sculpted rather than grown. As Claire's rideshare eased past the gates and into the circular driveway, she felt the familiar weight of history pressing against her chest. From the outside, she appeared every bit the underachieving youngest daughter, hair tied back simply, no makeup, an off-brand wool coat that had seen better winters, and scuffed leather boots that made just enough noise to feel out of place among the polished shoes stepping onto marble floors inside. Claire stepped out of the car, clutching a weathered leather tote. Inside it were a few sketches, some mock-ups, and her decoy tablet, tools of her long-running charade. To her family, this was Claire, the freelance illustrator still clinging to dreams. The artist who had turned her back on legacy and responsibility. She glanced up at the massive double doors, already open, spilling warmth and light and curated perfection into the chilly evening air. Showtime. As she crossed the threshold, a familiar voice called out from behind a crystal chandelier. "Claire! You made it before they locked the doors this time." It was Jonathan, her cousin, 3 years older, now a senior partner at a private equity firm. He wore his success like a cologne, thick and unmistakable. "Wouldn't miss it," Claire replied, keeping her tone breezy. "Free food, live jazz, and a crowd full of unsolicited career advice? How could I resist?" He laughed, more at her than with her, and gave her a quick once-over. His smile faltered for a beat. Her clothes said struggling. Her eyes didn't. Inside, the event buzzed with energy. Servers glided between guests with silver trays. The Rothschild logo had been subtly embossed on the cocktail napkins. Art, carefully curated, abstract, and soulless, hung along the gallery wall. Claire scanned the room. There was Ava, in a sharp emerald dress, sipping champagne beside a city council member. Uncle Daniel and Aunt Elise were deep in conversation about cryptocurrency policies. Her brother Henry stood by the fireplace, basking in attention, wearing a tailored navy suit and that smug grin she knew too well. As she approached, a chorus of faux surprised greetings washed over her. "Claire, it's been ages. Still in? What was it again? Creative stuff? Oh, I meant to send you that job listing at the advertising agency." Claire smiled, nodded, took sips of sparkling water, and answered with the same polite vagueness she'd practiced for years. "Still doing design work. Keeping busy. Nothing major, just a few commissions here and there." Then came the voice she had expected, the one that always managed to find the most precise way to diminish her. "Claire." Her father's tone was a blend of command and exhaustion. He approached with his signature expression, stern affection, as though loving her required effort. "I see you came straight from work," he said, eyes flicking over her coat. "I did," Claire replied. "Didn't want to miss the toast." He nodded curtly. "We'll talk later. Your brother's preparing a presentation. Big things happening for the firm." Claire resisted the urge to smirk. She already knew what the presentation entailed. She'd read the pitch deck 2 nights ago, forwarded to her anonymously by a junior executive at Wheeler. Her brother, confident as ever, was planning to unveil Rothschild Financial's expansion into digital media storytelling, complete with virtual training modules and AI-assisted branding. The irony? He was pitching a future built entirely on the infrastructure she now owned. A small voice in her ear broke her thoughts. "Still doodling fairy tales, Claire?" She turned to find her cousin Lila, a luxury skincare founder who made passive-aggressive commentary into an art form. Her tone dripped with honey. Claire smiled warmly. "Actually, I recently finished a piece that sold to a startup for 7 figures." Lila blinked, clearly unsure whether Claire was joking. Claire gave her no further detail. The night continued in a blur of curated conversations, family politics, and champagne flutes refilled with mathematical efficiency. She slipped away when she could, once to a quiet balcony to answer a final message from her legal team, confirming that press releases had been embargoed until 10 a.m. sharp. Another time to the Hall of Portraits, where generations of Rothschild faces loomed down in oil and gold leaf. In the corner, barely visible, was a small photo of her. 17. Paint on her hoodie. A half-finished sculpture in the background. A tiny smile. She paused. For a moment, she let herself remember that girl, the one who still believed she had to prove her worth in their world. A clink of glass interrupted her thoughts. The toast was beginning. Claire returned to the main hall as Henry stepped forward beneath the glittering chandelier. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "Tonight, we don't just honor the past, we unveil our future. As we move toward our 8th decade, Rothschild Financial is proud to announce our expansion into the digital media space." Claire watched as slides played behind him. Buzzwords. Charts. Diagrams of the Wheeler division, her division, framed as if Henry had birthed it himself. She kept her expression neutral. She wasn't here to interrupt. Not yet. Later, near the coat check, Henry found her. "You should think about joining us, you know. Wheeler's going to need illustrators. Entry level, of course, but it's stable. Benefits. A real paycheck." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Entry level?" He chuckled. "Just until you get your bearings. I mean, you've been doing freelance gigs all this time, right?" She nodded slowly. "Right. Freelance." He patted her arm. "Don't overthink it. It's a chance to get your foot in the door." Claire bit her lip to keep from laughing. She could see the future so clearly now. In a few hours, the press would break the story. The boardroom would welcome its new owner. And the Rothschild would have to come to terms with the fact that the little girl with paint on her hoodie had not only built a business, but one powerful enough to absorb theirs. As she stepped outside, the winter air hit her like a blessing. She zipped up her coat, checked the time, 10:43 p.m., and let out a breath that fogged the night. One more sleep. Then the performance ends. The executive floor of Rothschild Tower smelled like polished wood and generational entitlement. Claire Mori stepped out of the private elevator, heels clicking softly on the marble tiles, each step echoing with purpose. The air here was colder, not just from the climate control, but from the weight of expectation. This was the floor where empires were managed, deals brokered, and dynasties defended. This morning, Claire wasn't wearing the thrifted coat or scuffed boots from last night's gala. Today, she wore a custom-tailored camel blazer over a steel-gray blouse, matching trousers, and heels sharp enough to cut silence. Her hair was pinned back with effortless elegance, and subtle gold earrings glinted under the recessed lighting. Beside her stood Marcus Vale, her chief operating officer and the only person in the building who truly knew the magnitude of this moment. They had started NovaPath together. Built it pixel by pixel, pitch by pitch. Now, standing at the threshold of Rothschild's boardroom, they shared a glance. "You sure about doing this in person?" Marcus asked softly. Claire didn't hesitate. "I need to see their faces." With that, the door swung open. Inside, the Rothschild boardroom was exactly as she remembered from childhood glimpses: mahogany table, leather-bound chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Marlow City's skyline. At the head of the table sat her father, Everett Rothschild, flanked by Henry and two other board members. The room buzzed with low chatter, until they saw her. "Claire?" Henry stood slowly, confusion creasing his brow. "This is a closed meeting." Her father frowned. "You shouldn't be here." Claire offered a polite, businesslike smile and stepped forward. "Actually, I should. This meeting was called at the request of NovaPath Media's executive team." Everett blinked. Why would NovaPath have anything to do with Rothschild's digital division? Claire set her leather briefcase down and opened it with precision. From it, she pulled out a neatly stacked packet of documents and slid one in front of each board member. "Because," she said, voice calm and steady, "NovaPath now owns it." For a moment, there was only the shuffling of paper and the quiet gasp of one of the junior board assistants as she skimmed the title page. Official transfer of ownership, Velar Group Media to NovaPath Holdings. Signed, sealed, and executed as of 8 a.m. this morning. Everett's face drained of color. Henry looked like he'd swallowed broken glass. "This has to be a mistake," he stammered. "Solara Holdings purchased Velar last quarter." Claire nodded. "Solara is a shell company under NovaPath. Created for acquisition discretion." She let the next words settle like thunder. "I founded NovaPath." "You?" Everett's voice cracked, more from disbelief than rage. Claire stepped into the sunlight streaming through the tall windows, the city glittering behind her. "Yes. While you were all assuming I was selling handmade greeting cards, I was leading one of the fastest growing digital creative firms in North America." Henry was flipping through the documents now, hands trembling. "You're Claire Mori. The CEO?" Claire nodded. "And effective immediately, your former media division is being absorbed into our portfolio." "But," Everett started, grasping for ground. "Why hide it? Why the lies?" Claire's gaze sharpened. "Because if I'd told you the truth, you would have tried to take it. Or worse, mold it into something unrecognizable. I built NovaPath outside your shadow so it could grow without your rules." A stunned silence fell over the room. Claire walked to the far end of the table and took the seat that had been empty, the one across from her father. She folded her hands and continued. "I've watched for years as you passed judgment on me. Called me aimless. Immature. A child clinging to fantasy. But while you dismissed me, I learned. I studied. I built something with vision, emotion, and resilience. You saw fairy tales. I saw strategy. You let us think you were failing," Henry whispered, eyes still glued to the pages. "No," Claire said. "You chose to believe I was failing. You saw what you wanted to see. I let you underestimate me because it gave me space to work without interference." Everett's hands were now folded tightly, the veins in his knuckles visible. "And now what? You expect us to answer to you?" Claire held his gaze. "I expect professionalism. As the new owner, NovaPath will oversee a full restructure of Velar's leadership and operations. Henry, your role as division head is being dissolved. You may reapply if you're interested in creative development. Henry's mouth opened, but no sound came out. And you, father, Claire continued, will be moved to a strategic advisor role, with full honors. You'll retire gracefully, with your name on the wall and your legacy intact. But the future, my future, starts today. The door opened again, and Marcus stepped in with more folders for the rest of the board. He handed out schedules, press briefing notes, and transition guidelines. Everything was handled. Everything timed to perfection. Claire stood and placed her hand on the back of the chair she'd occupied. Today, she said, is not about revenge. It's about correction. The correction of a narrative that said creativity was a weakness. That emotion had no place in business. That daughters who think differently are destined to fail. Everett slowly rose from his seat, older and wearier than she'd ever seen him. I never imagined. No, Claire said gently, you didn't. A quiet buzz came from her phone. She glanced at the screen. New York Times exclusive, the artist behind the empire, Claire Mori unveiled as CEO of NovaPath in shocking acquisition of Rothschild Digital. She turned the screen to face the board. For years, she said, I let you believe I was something small. But I was never small. I was just out of sight. Now, I'm exactly where I belong. She gathered her things, her movements calm, composed. I'll see you all at the press conference this afternoon. Be ready to answer questions. As she and Marcus exited the room, Claire didn't look back. But the door didn't close softly. It clicked shut with a finality that echoed down the long hallway, like the last page of a long, complicated chapter. In the elevator, Marcus broke the silence. How do you feel? Claire exhaled. Like I just signed my name on the sky. He grinned. You sure did. Outside, the city was waking up, unaware that a legacy had just shifted hands. And Claire Mori was now the author of its next story. The roofed-up terrace of the NovaPath building shimmered under the golden blush of sunset. Claire Mori stood alone at the edge, a glass of still water in hand, her silhouette framed by the skyline she now helped shape. Below, the city pulsed with life. Office lights blinked on, traffic wove through the arteries of Marlow City, and the bay reflected a fractured mirror of fire and sky. But up here was stillness. Triumph without the noise. It had been less than 8 hours since the boardroom reveal, but the world already felt different. Her inbox overflowed. Journalists called non-stop. NovaPath's internal team had fielded a dozen partnership requests and 3 investment proposals before lunch. The name Claire Mori was trending on every business platform. But the buzz was background noise. What mattered most was something simpler, peace. For the first time, she no longer had to hide who she was. Behind her, the glass doors opened with a hush. Marcus stepped out, holding a tablet. They're ready for the all hands, he said. Staff's gathering in the atrium. Claire nodded but didn't move right away. She took another long look at the city. Then, quietly, she said, you ever think about how strange it is? That for years, I had to pretend to be less so I could become more? Marcus smiled softly. I think you turned invisibility into strategy. She returned the smile, and together they walked inside. The NovaPath atrium was alive with anticipation. Employees, writers, animators, engineers, strategists, had gathered from all departments. Even some of the newly transitioned team from Velar were there, standing cautiously on the sidelines, unsure of what to expect. Claire climbed the small set of stairs to the central platform. She didn't need a microphone, this space had been designed for storytelling, and it listened like an old friend. Hi everyone, she began. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. I know today's been unexpected, she said, glancing at the Velar group with warmth. You've probably read the news, seen the headlines, or at the very least heard the whispers. She paused, then continued. Yes, I'm Claire Mori. Yes, I founded NovaPath. And yes, for the last decade, I let the world, including my own family, believe I was failing. A murmur of disbelief passed through the crowd. I did that, she said, because I needed space to build something different. Something that didn't play by old rules. I needed to create a company where creativity wasn't a marketing tool, it was the business strategy. Where emotion wasn't weakness, but power. Where storytelling wasn't fluff, It was the bridge between vision and value. She walked slowly across the platform. My family comes from a world where success wears suits, speaks in charts, and hands titles down like heirlooms. I walked away from that. I chose pixels and storyboards, late nights and uncertainty. And it brought me here. She turned to the newcomers. And now, I'm inviting all of you into this next chapter. Whether you've been at NovaPath since day one or just joined from viewer, you're here because we believe in what's next, not just what's been. A moment passed. Then, she added with a smile, and if anyone offered you an entry-level job out of pity recently, you can decline. I promise. Laughter rippled across the room. From the corner, someone started clapping. Then another. Soon, the entire atrium erupted into applause, genuine, cathartic, electric. Claire's chest swelled, not with pride, but with relief. This wasn't revenge. It was redemption. Recognition. Resolution. Later that evening, she returned to her penthouse. The lights were low, the view still breathtaking. On the coffee table sat a wrapped box, left by her assistant Rena. Inside was her old sketchbook, the one from college, edges frayed, pages smudged with charcoal and ink. She flipped to the last page. In her own handwriting, faded but steady, was a quote she'd once read in a forgotten article. The greatest art lies in hiding your mastery until the perfect moment of revelation. Claire smiled. That moment had arrived. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ava, of all people. Just 4 words. And then another from her father, Everett. Longer. Hesitant. But sincere. She stared at the words for a long moment before locking her phone. The next day would bring board meetings, restructuring sessions, press conferences, and all the pressures of high leadership. But tonight, Claire allowed herself stillness. She walked out onto her balcony, the city stretching endlessly below. She raised a glass, not champagne, just water, but it felt sacred. To the ones they underestimated, she said softly. To the ones who build in silence. To the masterpiece no one sees until it's too late to stop. A gust of wind carried her words into the night. The following week, at a private Rothschild family dinner held at Cannell's, the most exclusive restaurant in Marlow, Claire entered not as the forgotten daughter, but as an equal. Or perhaps, as something more. Henry stood when she approached the table. I wanted to say, he began awkwardly, I didn't know about any of it. I know, she replied. That was the point. He looked embarrassed. You really built all that? Claire met his eyes. And I'm just getting started. Her father raised his glass. To Claire, he said, voice thick. The one who taught us that sometimes, legacy isn't inherited, it's created. The room fell silent. Then, one by one, they toasted. Not out of obligation. But out of awe. That night, alone again, Claire penned a letter, not to her family, or her investors, or even her team. It was to her younger self. Dear Claire. You did it. The road was long. Quiet. Lonely. But you stayed true. You made art out of doubt. You turned underestimation into fire. You walked away from applause to build something worth a standing ovation. And now, they see. Not because you shouted. But because your work spoke louder than anything you could have said. She signed it. Then tucked it between the final pages of her sketchbook. Claire Mori didn't just rewrite her family's legacy. She redrew the blueprint for what success could look like. And in doing so, she didn't just build an empire. She became one.